Today's reading is from Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Jeanette. If you've been around the Miz for a while, you know Pastor Daniel grew up in West Africa, in Burkina Faso. And he grew up, he's talked about this before, in one of the areas of the world that is affected by a terrible little scourge called the guinea worm. And he's told us about this thing and just how awful guinea worm disease actually is. It's this parasite that you get through drinking infected water that has guinea worm eggs in it. And those little eggs, they hatch inside you, and they feed on what you feed on, and they steal life and joy and vitality from you, and they grow in your body under your skin. And they can grow up to about 3 feet long or so before they start climbing and crawling through your skin back out into the world. And as they do this, they create these awful, excruciating, oozing, painful sores that are just intolerably awful. And the only thing that offers some relief when you have this happening to you is the one thing you can't do. The only thing that offers relief is to soak in the cool water of the river, the stream, or the lake that you got the guinea worm out of. And that's what they want. They want to get back into the water to lay more eggs and guarantee another generation of not just guinea worm, but of awful, excruciating, painful, horrible suffering. And it's a terrible problem. And in 1986, there were 3.5 million recorded cases of guinea worm in the world. There's 21 different countries that deal with this thing. And then something incredible happened. In 2017, barely 30 years later, there was only 30 known cases of guinea worm disease. In 30 years, it went from 3.5 million down to 30. Now, how did that happen? It was the Carter Center. The center started by former President Jimmy Carter. And they decided to take on guinea worm. And so they wanted to wipe it out. And to do that, they knew they needed to do 2 things. They needed to keep people from drinking infected water, and they needed people who are infected to keep from putting it back into the water supply, all the rivers and lakes and streams that it comes from. So that meant on the front end, to prevent infection, they needed to filter the water. And of course, in a lot of these communities and small cities and so on, they didn't have ways to do this. And so what they did was they would have the women, who were often responsible for collecting water, they would have one empty jug and one full jug, and they would put their skirt or their dress over the empty one and pour the water through that, and their dress would act as a filter. And it actually worked to pull the eggs out. That's the front end. And on the back end, to keep people from putting the guinea worm back into the water supply, if anyone did get infected, it was the responsibility of every person in their family, tribe, village, whatever, to keep them out of the water. You have to imagine how difficult that would be to do. That if it's your child or maybe your elderly parent that's suffering these awful, excruciating sores on their body, you cannot let them do the one thing that will give them some sense of relief. Because if you do, you guarantee suffering for more people down the road. But it worked. That was the one thing. After thousands of years and millions of people struggling through this awful infection, they've almost virtually completely wiped it off the face of the earth. They have prevented millions of more people from suffering that awful thing by just those 2 things: keep people from drinking infected water and keep infected people from going back in. It's pretty incredible, isn't it? And more than anything else, more than all the creative planning and all the coaching and communication and training and all the buy-in it required one thing above all else: the participation of every single person. Every single person in every single place in those 21 countries had to do their part on both ends, from keeping things from getting infected and from preventing the spread. And as a result, millions of people have been spared awful, awful suffering. So it makes me wonder, I'm going to ask, what incredible things could we overcome if we had everybody's buy-in and participation? What illnesses could be defeated? What systemic problems and injustices and awful things that are reality could be overcome and overwhelmed and defeated? What relational problems could we take down together? Broken families, broken neighborhoods. Whatever all these things are that are the consequences of sin and death in the world, all these awful things, could we, as the people of God, called and empowered by His Spirit, alive and at work within us, what could we rid the world of? And for you, what problems could disappear from your life if you had everybody's buy-in and participation to make a difference? What things would be better? So this is one of our core convictions here at the Mid-City Church, that if real people discover real connection with a real God and other real people, we say anything is possible. Anything can happen in your life. Anything. Marriages can be restored. Bodies can be healed. Families put back together again. Addictions overcome. Depression overwhelmed. Hopes revived. Possibilities realized. All kinds of great things can happen, and it just begins right here. Real connection with God and with each other. That's where it happens. And so my conviction is this. We are on a mission to see evil eradicated from the world. God has called each one of us to buy in, to participate, to make a difference, to see all people everywhere freed from the effects of sin and death. And there are some behaviors, kind of like filtering the water, keeping people out of infected people out. Some behaviors that are higher leverage than others. They make a difference. They make the big difference. And they can be the difference between success and failure. And often, in a lot of cases, that difference between success and failure, it is the difference between life and death. And so, in the words that Jeanette read, the words we heard from King Solomon, 3,000 years old, those words. They give us some of the insight we need, those high leverage behaviors that make all the difference. Life and death. And it begins here. Now, sin, of course, sin is the root of every and all problem in the world. Everything bad in all of creation begins with sin. And sin is what creates and perpetuates all the other problems, all the other things, awful things like guinea worm, or like broken hearts and broken families. But there's one condition in particular that I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about here. It's a condition that it's very common in our part of the world. It has been around for hundreds of years, and it can be terminal if it goes untreated. And of course, during COVID time, during the pandemic, it's just spread like crazy. It's awful. And you can diagnose this condition in children pretty much as soon as they are verbal, sometimes even earlier. And it is a travesty to see because it is entirely preventable and entirely treatable. And the first diagnosis, it happens as one single system. That's one symptom. It is this. The first time you hear a child say, "I can do it myself." This is the condition of deathly independence. And so now, independence on its own can be a good thing. We want every person to grow up, to learn to take responsibility for themselves and their lives. But the problem is, especially in our part of the world, independence can become a way of life. And when it becomes a way of life, it becomes a way to death. And so this is why Solomon writes. He writes those words that we heard, the first words we heard. Woe to him who is alone. See, the person who is alone, they will fall, and they have no one to help them up. They'll be attacked by an enemy and overtaken and overpowered. The one who's alone will be snapped like a delicate string. So I want to tell you about a particular case that I saw in person. It's extreme suffering from this condition. I'll just show you some pictures of it. It's absolutely awful. This is my son. We diagnosed him before he was even a year old, and it started happening when we were feeding him, and before he could even say the words, he would hammer the spoon away from us and try and grab it himself, that he wanted to control it himself, and he couldn't say anything. He didn't have any words yet, but he would just flail and squawk like an angry, wounded chicken, and so we just could do nothing but just back off and let him go down the broad road to destruction, and this is where it ended up. Just like that. And he's oblivious to it. That's the problem. He doesn't even know how badly he's suffering. And so our only option was to let him go through it. And so parents, other parents in the room, you have seen this. You know what it's like to watch your kids suffer. You want to help them. You want to feed them, clothe them, help them put the toys back together, the Lego back together. And they just insist on that deathly independence. I will do it myself. You know what it's like to watch kids suffer. But we know what it's like to watch friends suffer. And that's where it gets just so sad, so tragic. That we make this a way of life, even as adults. Only when we're adults, when we suffer this condition, it gets worse because we're way better at concealing what's really going on. We know how to hide our messes. And we might want to try to change things. We might want to try and clean things up. We might feel regret about what's happened. We might long for more in life. But we keep secrets. We hide our pain. We don't let anyone in. We hide our failures. We just insist everything is fine. I'm okay. I can do it myself. And it's cute when you're a baby. But it is fatal as an adult. We insist on independence even when we're dying inside. And these days, we just have so many great tools to connect us. You have your phones and the computers and the social media and the Zoom and FaceTime, all of these things that are supposed to connect us, and yet it's not happening. It's going in the other direction. We are not leveraging all of these great things to actually improve connection in our lives. And so we live in pseudo-connection. So it looks like we're linked in. It looks like we're connected to each other, but we die inside. Slow deaths. Everyone, you probably remember Robin Williams, one of the funniest, most gifted, talented comedians ever. And he had such an amazing gift. And yet, most people, when he was alive, didn't know about the incredible depression he suffered. And so this is something he said in an interview, something very profound, and I think it just speaks to this condition. He said, "I used to think the worst thing in life is to end up alone. It's not. The worst thing in life is to be surrounded by people, but feel like you're alone." And this problem, it just affects everyone, young and old, rich and poor, even the gifted, talented, wealthy. If you do not have real connection with real people, then really you might as well have nothing. And we were not designed to live this way. Way back in the very first pages of the Bible, in Genesis, it says that God creates everything in all of creation, the earth and the seas and the skies, and he fills all of them with abundant life. And he says that all of it is good. It's all very good. It is so good. It's just the way everything God intended it to be. And then he creates the man, in Adam, in his image, to be like him in the earth. And he puts him in this garden where he's to work, to do good work, productive work. He names the animals and he tills the ground. And there's only one problem. Even while everything else is good and very good, it says the man is lonely. And God sees him in his condition. And while everything, before the fall, before sin, everything everywhere good, God says it is not good for man to be alone. Everything else just as he intended. One problem to solve. And we've been dealing with it ever since. Ever since. A former U.S. Surgeon General, a guy named Vivek Murthy, he wrote an article in Harvard Business Review called "Work and the Loneliness Epidemic." And this is what he said just a few years ago, that in our day, in this part of the world, he says, that the most destructive force on a person's health, this is worse than cancer, it's worse than diabetes or heart disease, he says, is loneliness. And so this is from the article. He says, loneliness has more than doubled since the 1980s, that well over 40% of Americans report suffering from loneliness at significant levels. And experts expect that the actual total is considerably higher because people are just reluctant to say, I feel lonely. So people think we can make it on our own, but deathly independence will take you out. And so the article goes on. It says that loneliness is worse for your health than smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and it crushes the soul. And that's not the Bible. That's not a pastor. That's a U.S. Surgeon General. Good, strong connections with God and each other make life better. They move us forward. They move us toward all our dreams, all our desires, all our hopes. And loneliness and disconnectedness hold you back. They make you miserable, and they can even kill you. Woe to him who is alone. And so then, if that's true, then the opposite is also true. How fortunate is the one who is connected to others, because you win the life or death struggle. Real connection, it means having someone who knows your real struggles. They're with you in them. You know theirs. Real connection is to know each other's greatest hopes, greatest dreams, greatest longings. It means to be able to encourage each other when things get hard, when they fall and need someone to help them up. And so next then, Solomon, he makes a couple statements there, and at first they don't seem immediately connected, that one can be overpowered and that a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. See, in the battle against evil, whether it's evil like something like the guinea worm, or it's something evil like a failing marriage, whatever it is, there will be forces that come against you, and they will try to overwhelm you. They try to overpower you. And if we go alone, we may not physically die, but we don't move forward. We don't thrive. And the truth is that eventually, one way or another, we give up. We break down. We break up. We get weary, we surrender, we give in, we throw the towel. So woe to him who is alone, because evil will overpower you. Evil will overwhelm you. It happens. And so here's where the comment about the rope comes in then, that a 3-cord rope is strong. So you alone you are a string. And the string, it can't handle much weight before it snaps, before it breaks. So when temptation weighs you down, when struggle is weighing you down, eventually you snap and break. And so the ideal time to build real connection with other people is not when you are struggling. The ideal time to begin building connection is before the struggle. So it's the relationships you develop when everything is going right that get you through when everything goes wrong. I've talked before up here about a guy named Aaron Ralston. Aaron Ralston wrote the book Between a Rock and a Hard Place, and that became the movie 127 Hours. And it told the story, he went on a hike in southeastern Utah, and all alone, and he went into some kind of canyon or crevice, and while he was down there, an 800-pound boulder became dislodged and pinned his arm up against the side of this rock wall. And so for 5 days, 127 hours, he was there rationing the little water he had, the little food that he had. But after 5 days, he was getting weak and tired and dehydrated, and he knew he had only one option left. And so he summoned all of his courage, all of his strength, and he managed to amputate his arm with a dull pocket knife. How is that for I can do it myself? That's pretty impressive. But he knew that he would die if he didn't take drastic measures quickly. And so the whole tale, it's pretty fast. It's a cool movie. It's a cool book. The whole thing is really impressive, all of that courage. But he gave an interview in National Geographic, and there's a couple of quotes from there that I think tell the whole story, the tragedy of it. And he said this: I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I knew no one was looking for me. Now, what a tragedy it would be if we said that about your life. That evil overpowered you, and you fell, and you had no one to help you up again because no one was looking. See, this guy, he was in the very worst situation of his life, life or death, and no one knew. No one had any idea what was happening. I learned a cool new word this morning over breakfast, and I might not say it quite right, but it's a word I'd never heard before, and it's this: Mauerbauer Traurigkeit. And it's the urge every person feels at times to push people away even when you need them. Mauerbauer Traurigkeit. And so over and over in deathly independence, it's just more common than we realize. We stumble, we fall, we go down one way or another, but no one knows. No one's paying attention. No one's looking for you. And here's the truth. The truth is, my worst mistakes, my worst decisions, my worst failures in my life, they happened when no one knew what was going on. Whether it was because I isolated myself, whether it's because I didn't want people to know, I didn't want people to see how I was struggling, that's when I do it. But what if someone had known? What if someone knew to ask the questions? What if I'd invited somebody in already when things were going well so that they were there for me when things are going wrong? What could have been different? What heartache would I have saved myself and saved others from? What would I have been able to spend all the energy that went into fixing things if I could have redirected that into something positive, something life-giving, something good? What could have been different? And I had to make, in my worst moments, I had to make those heartbreaking phone calls to friends, to coworkers, to people I look up to. Send those emails and let them know how I had failed. I had fallen and couldn't get up. I know what it's like. I've had to make those phone calls on behalf of others. Break the news to someone. And it seems these days, more than ever, I'm getting more of the phone calls, more of the text messages, more is happening, that people are struggling and failing. And when it happens, there's at first always an element of secrecy. Nobody knows at first. Nobody's watching for it. But the thing is, the habits, the dangerous thoughts or temptations that are sown into in darkness, they always grow into the light. They're always exposed. It always comes out sooner or later. And then there's consequences. But what if someone knew? What if they were there? See, we need to remember, you have a spiritual enemy who wants to see you fail. It is his job to overwhelm you and overpower you. It's what he wants to do. He wants you to suffer. He does not want the good plans that God has for your life to come into the light of day. And 1 Peter 5 says he's like a lion prowling, roaring, looking for his prey. And lions hunt by isolating and then attacking the weaker members of the herd. They pick you off when you're lonely and disconnected. He wants to devour you, and so often we just make his job easier than it needs to be. Woe to him who's alone. One can be overpowered. Alone, we are a string. But then that also means that together, we are a rope that does not break. And so all of that there is, that's why we have this saying around here, where we say this: everyone walks a sacred journey, and together we go further. That your life is got sacred intentions behind it. God has designed you on purpose, with purpose. And to fully realize that in your life, we have to avoid deathly independence, the isolation, and fully depend on interdependence, each other, woven together like a rope. That we need others around us, fully invested, fully connected, fully aware of what it is we're moving towards, what it is that holds us back. And so Solomon, he says, two get a better return for their labor. When we invest in one another, it's that we push each other further. When we're working together towards the same things, we all aim higher. When you know someone is watching you, when you know someone's paying attention to what you're doing, we just do better. We're better people when someone else is watching. A little while ago, my wife and our little guy, we were at Costco shopping, and we had someone else from the church with us. We had driven them there, and they were shopping. We were going to take them back home again with all their groceries. And after the exhausting, fun, sometimes distracting trip that you can go through Costco, going through the maze and putting too much in, and you spend the whole deal of shopping at Costco, and then getting everything back out to the vehicle, and our little guy was tired and hungry, and we were kind of tired and hungry and growling bellies, and we just wanted to get home. But as we're throwing in all the groceries into the vehicle, we noticed one box at the bottom of the cart that we had missed, that the cashier had missed, and the person that checks your receipt when you're walking out, they had also missed, and it hadn't been paid for. And so we had this temptation in that moment, in our tiredness, in our fatigue. Because we know that if we're going to pay for that thing, we got to walk the mile back across the parking lot, then we got to go all the way through the store, then we got to get back in line at the till, then we got to pay more money for this thing, then we got to go back through the thing and get them to check it again, then we got to walk the mile back to the vehicle, and then finally we can put it in the car and drive away. And so the temptation is just throw it in and leave. Praise the Costco gods for blessing us out of their fruitful abundance. It's a bonus. So what do you think we did? We went back in and we paid for it. Of course we did. We had somebody from the church there. He was watching us. He knew what we were going to do. One day I knew I would have to tell you that story right here. Of course we paid for it. I'm a better person when somebody is watching me and paying attention to what I'm doing. I'm a better person when my wife is watching me and paying attention. I'm a better person when my dog has her big blue eyes pointing up at me. I'm a better person then, just with her around. We're better people. We aim higher when we're invested in each other's, when we're woven together, strong like a rope. That's the way it is. Together, we go further. Now, we all know what it is also to give in to peer pressure, to do something stupid. You know, I first began to understand the negative strength of peer pressure when I was just a kid. And I read this book on it, and it rattled me so deeply. I was very young at the time, that I just made the decision that ever since I've read it to all of my kids. They know this story. They know this book. Just to prepare them for the way that peer pressure can bear down on you in life. And so the book is about a young person that because of peer pressure, they get persuaded to eat rotten, botulism-infected food. And they go along with it, just because of this other young person's persistent, insistent badgering. It's unbelievable what peer pressure can make us do. I'm just going to share a little bit of the wisdom from that book to get you ready for this. And it starts like this. Here's the peer pressure. Would you eat them here or there? And then there's the resistance. First, the little guy says, I would not eat them anywhere. And then there's more pressure. Would you eat them in a house? Would you eat them with a mouse? And for a long time, the guy, he holds his own. But eventually, that naughty little Sam I Am just wears him down, all the peer pressure. And finally, the dude, he gives in and he eats this green, disgusting, moldy, rotten green eggs and ham. And he gets so deceived by peer pressure. You know what he says? I like them. I do like them, Sam I Am. That's how deceiving peer pressure is. It's what it does to us. It ruins us. And yet, you know, we like to think we're different. We like to think we're not vulnerable to this. We like to think that we have the willpower. We can withstand anything. We can hold anything back. But we're wrong. Eventually, we all give in. Eventually, all of us might eat the green eggs and ham. But the same is also true the opposite direction, that peer pressure can work to your advantage if you're connected to others and you're all moving in the right direction together. There was a university in Britain that did some research on this with people training in the gym, and the people who had spotters and partners and the people who didn't. And it turns out that if you have somebody working out with you, you can lift more weight more often. heavier weights for more reps. And so that they determined that people with a spotter or a partner could lift, on average, 11.2% more in their workout, weight and reps. And so it means that literally peer pressure moving in the right direction means you grow stronger faster. You can make it work to your advantage when you have someone doing with you. That together, surrounded with others, woven together like a rope, we are stronger. We can endure. We last. We overcome great things together. So in Alcoholics Anonymous, they get it. The recovery programs, they know how important this is. That to work the program, you need a spotter. Everybody gets a sponsor. You have an ally corner in your corner with you. It's the positive peer pressure. Someone who's gone a little further down the road than you. They know what it's like to struggle. They know what it's like to feel weak. They know when you're tempted. They know how to help you. They know how to lift you up when you fall. They believe in you. They can resist the enemy with you. They help with life's heavy loads. Alone you're a string, but together we're rope. I heard about a woman this week who was really struggling. And then a friend phoned to ask her how she was doing. And she said, I'm just doing terrible. I have this splitting headache. My knees ache, my back aches. The kids are absolutely crazy. And the house is a disaster zone. And then she said the words. She said, I just feel so alone. And so this woman, the caller, she had just loads of sympathy. And she just said, look, you go lie down and rest. I am going to come over right away. I'm going to cook lunch. I'll look after the kids. I will clean up the house. I will be there until Sam gets home after work. And she said, but by the way, how is Sam? How is he doing with all of this? And there was a long pause. And the woman said, who is Sam? My husband's not Sam. And then there's another long pause. And the woman says, oh dear, I've dialed the wrong number. And one more pause, and the woman said, does that mean you're not coming over? So it's this. It's all of the research, all of the studies, all of our experiences. They just tell us the very same thing that King Solomon said 3,000 years ago. The very same thing. Woe to him who is alone, but together we all go further. But here's the catch. Here's what everything hangs on. And it's the one thing that is the hardest thing to do. And it's this. Real connection hinges on relational vulnerability. See, if you are the one who is alone and it's late at night and it's dark, you fall. You stumble. Late at night, in the dark, on a cold night, you're vulnerable to every kind of attack you can imagine, whether it's a spiritual attack, whether it's an enemy and a robber, whatever it is that might be out there alone in the dark. You're vulnerable in every way. But also on the other side, it's the fear of being vulnerable that keeps us from exposing ourselves to other people around us, that keeps us from being truly connected to others. Because in real connection with real pain, you experience real vulnerability. All of our fears and mistakes can be exposed. Our greatest worries can be revealed. And we have these fears that weigh so heavy. Fear of rejection, fear of betrayal. Duke University did some research on this, and brain scans and neuroscience. It shows that people experience the pain of rejection and betrayal the same physical way that they experience pain from Crohn's disease or irritable bowel syndrome. It is that real in our bodies. And that fear keeps us from exposing ourselves, keeps us from opening up. It keeps us enslaved in deathly independence. And so I talk to people all the time who've experienced this pain. And the problem is the one thing they need to heal from their pain of being hurt by others, it's the one thing they've been traumatized by. And so to go further together, it requires the next step of vulnerability, of exposing yourself, to go beyond what feels comfortable. And I know that in a room like this, even with these people, everybody online, everybody's in a different place. There's another new word I learned this morning, sonder. And it means the awareness that every person around you has a life as complicated and as rich as yours. Everybody's dealing with it. And we experience that fear of vulnerability. The other new word, Mauerbauer Traurigkeit. We're afraid, and so we keep people at arm's length. We keep them away from us. And yet the very thing we need to get where we want to be is the thing we're afraid of. And so I promise you, there is never, ever, ever a good time to take this step. There's never a perfect time to do it, except for the time you're in right now. To take the risk, to make yourself vulnerable. To be ready for both the joyful wonder that comes through rich, strong connection with God and each other, and the potential for harm and hurt that moves you backwards in life. But there's no way around it. There's great risk, but through great risk is the only way to great reward. And so just this week, make the phone call, ask someone for coffee, invite someone over, make a connection with somebody, start a life group in your house. Position yourself to be vulnerable to somebody that can also be vulnerable to you, that together, whether it's a group, whether it's just the two, that you're experiencing the potential that can happen when people are truly connected to God and each other. And so this is what the Miz is about. This is who we are, that we're a place where real people discover real connection with a real God and each other. It is a place where everyone is welcome and no one's perfect. That means we all make mistakes. We all slip up. We might hurt each other. But we believe that because of that in God, anything is possible. Anything can happen. Everyone's welcome. No one's perfect. But anything is possible here. And so I'm just going to close with this. A couple summers ago, there's a family in Florida that went down to the ocean, to the beach for a swim. And while they were out playing around in the water, the mother noticed that 3 of her sons were not around. She couldn't see them. And then she heard their screams. And so she was about to rush out towards them, but she had 5 other family members around her, and they held her back because they could see the kids were getting pulled under by the current. And of course, the love of a mother, there's nothing they could do to restrain her. So all 6 of them went out to get these 3, but then all 9 of them get caught in the current, and they're all being pulled under. But there was a woman nearby in a boogie board who started to go towards them. She saw the struggle, and so she started to move them out towards them in the water. And her husband started to gather people on the shore. And one person at a time, those who could swim, they went a little further out. Those who couldn't stayed at the shore. And there's a picture of it here. One by one, they formed an 80-person human chain from the beach out to these 9 people getting pulled under by the water. And one by one, they handed every person back to safety. Every person. 9 lives were saved that day because everyone came together as one. Now, here's the thing. No one knew that day when they headed out to the beach that they were being uniquely positioned to save a life, to save 9 lives. And yet, because they were there, because they all got connected, there wasn't 9 funerals that could have been. There's 9 futures that are being realized because they were there. And this is the picture of who we are as a church, that we have this Heavenly Father, that nothing would hold him back. He sent his own Son into the world to find each and every lost sinner and bring them home again. Bring them all home. Bring them home. Make everybody bring back to safety. That this is our mission, that together we are linked together as one to save lives, to save destinies, to rescue people, that together we can see all things made new. Because of what God is doing here and now, each and every one of us. No one knew here that when you drove to church this morning, that here you are positioned to be a part of saving life. This is the difference between success and failure, life or death. Often it's you. And you don't know it at the time. You do not know the difference the phone call will make. You don't know what difference it'll make just showing up, just being there, just being positioned, just being ready, just being connected to one another. And yet through it, we see people overcome awful problems. Sin is defeated. Death is overcome. Lives are renewed and restored. Relationships are put back together. It happens. It happens every day. Because the people of God answer this call. They're willing to risk vulnerability. Woe to him who is alone. But together we all go further. So I'm just going to pray. And Brandon, you're going to lead us in a song. And you people, you just get to worship the God whose love could not be overcome. Heavenly Father, again, so grateful for everything that you do, everything you've done to make family, that in a world that is disconnected and where there's so much pain and loneliness, we can know real family. And even though it comes at real risk, there's no wound you can't heal. There's no heart you can't restore. That there's no darkness that you can't bring great light out of. So for each and every person, Lord, help us find our place. In Jesus' name, amen.